seen the most about. The requirement that employees pay for more of their health care, the requirement that they pay for their pension, and the Badger care. And I think that's what most of the debates you will see on the floor of the State Assembly tomorrow is going to revolve around those issues. And when we ever get this bill to the floor of the State Senate, I expect the debate will revolve around those issues again. Now, you're showing me something. Oh, 4K. I don't know whether Governor Walker is going to deal with this. I don't think he's going to deal with it, but you should be aware of 4-year-old kindergarten, which is something I've been in the paper on. It would seem to me that we're in the budget crisis we're currently on. One of the first things you do is you say, okay, look, the state's fiscal shape has gotten worse over the last 10 years. Are there any new things that have been added in the last 10 years that we weren't paying for 10 years ago? During the last 10 years, Wisconsin has had a huge increase in the number of districts which provide 4-year-old kindergarten. I mean, 4-year-old kindergarten's been in the city of Sheboygan longer than that, but I'm sure there are other surrounding school districts that you may be members of that have added 4-year-old kindergarten. There are some studies that I assume out there are favorable to 4K. But the studies that I am most familiar with show that 4-year-old kindergarten is not beneficial. And when I think back when I was a child, I can see why the studies show what it shows. You can teach a 4-year-old child to read, you can teach a 5-year-old child to read, you can teach a 6-year-old child to read. And I remember when I was in first grade, there were kids whose parents taught them to read before I went to school. However, by the time those kids are in 3rd or 4th grade, they're all the same. In a very high-profile study, Oklahoma had like the gold standard for 4-year-old kindergarten. They put a lot of money into it, they met all the benchmark standards, and Oklahoma's reading scores since they went to 4-year-old kindergarten have dropped. Now that doesn't always happen, but it's interesting to see with their well-funded program it hasn't improved the reading scores. Wisconsin, as the result right now, is one of the leaders in the country as far as the percentage of 4-year-olds who are in kindergarten. One of the reasons we have gone to 4-year-old kindergarten, and many superintendents will tell you this in the quiet of their own office, is the way state aid works is we allow every school district to spend up to a certain cap. And that cap is a multiplier of the amount of money you are spending per pupil times the number of pupils you have. Okay? And every year that cap goes up and down. Until this point, the cap always goes up. Like they may tell the Sheboygan School District, next year or this year you can spend $200 more per child than last year. And we count all the kids in the school and multiply it times an amount, $9,000, $9,500, $10,000, whatever, to see how much the Sheboygan schools can spend. And perhaps a flaw in that formula, which has been in existence since 1993, every child counts the same. But anybody who manages a school district knows that it's much more expensive to educate a senior in high school than a 6 or 7 or 4-year-old, because it requires a lot more equipment in high school. As the result, if you're trying to balance a school budget, you want more 7 or 6 or 5 or 4-year-olds and less 17 or 18-year-olds. And as the result, to make it easier to balance their budget, over the last 20 years, a lot of districts, first of all, went from half-day kindergarten, 5-year-old kindergarten, to all-day 5-year-old kindergarten, and now have introduced 4-year-old kindergarten. Right now, 4-year-old kindergarten is costing the state of Wisconsin about it's costing about $220 million a year. Now, you may have heard your local school superintendents, and I met with a few of them this morning, complaining that they don't have enough money to do what they want in high school or do what they want in middle school. It would seem to me if they are genuinely right in that, it would be better to take the money from 4-year-old kindergarten, which many districts have only put in there to get the additional spending authority, and take that money and spend it in the middle school or high schools. And as the result, I've called for changing the aid formula not to encourage 4-year-old kindergarten anymore. I believe Scott Walker's not going to listen to me, so you all can be happy. But Scott Walker would rather do whatever else Scott Walker's doing in the budget. But I do think in the long run, for the good of our society, we should not have the government paying for four-year-old kindergarten, which I think the studies will show over time is not effective. I will also point out that the federal government pays for something called Head Start. Sometimes what I hear from people is they say, okay, Glenn, on four-year-old kindergarten, maybe some children don't need four-year-old kindergarten, but what about those children of the poor, bad parents, which anything would be better than keeping them with their parents? And assuming there are parents out there that are so bad we have to get them away from their parents, there is a federally funded program called Head Start. And Head Start is a program primarily for low-income students, also some students who test poorly and they feel need a Head Start. A couple things about Head Start. First of all, Head Start is federally funded, so we don't have to pay for it. Head Start also is non-union, which is why, frequently the teachers' union would have a four-year-old kindergarten than Head Start. The other thing about Head Start is, despite the fact that it's been around for about 40 to 45 years, studies do not, once again, show that it's particularly effective, which shows one more time that, and it shouldn't be that difficult to show it's effective, would it? I mean, you would figure there's so many districts that might have four-year-old kindergarten, one does, the other doesn't, that, if it was effective, the studies would show it, but it just isn't panning out. There's one other thing I want to tell you when you talk about Wisconsin schools. When I was growing up, Wisconsin schools were perceived to be some of the best in the country. And lately, we've been having some problems on our test scores. And I wasn't aware of this until recently. It was pointed out to me by some members of the School Boards Association. You would figure, and I'll remind you, that Wisconsin has some of the highest percentage of four-year-olds right now going to four-year-old kindergarten in the country. And this is something that's evolved over the last 20 years. But every year, there is something called the NAEP test scores, which are done nationwide. And we can compare different states on these test scores. When I was growing up, we always heard Wisconsin had great test scores. On the most recent fourth grade test scores that I have, which is 2008, maybe there's some new ones I'm not aware of that have come out. They break down these test scores by race, which I hate, but that's the way the liberals who keep track of these things do today. They have to keep track of everything by race. For fourth grade kids in the state of Wisconsin, the black kids are doing the worst of any of the 50 states in the country for fourth grade reading scores. For white kids, you know where we are? Just a little bit below average, which is kind of frightening, because when I was growing up, we thought of Wisconsin being in great shape. We didn't think of, the kids being a little less than average on fourth grade reading